Okay, welcome to B1 Biology Part 2. Okay, if this is the first video you're coming to, then you want to go back to Part 1 and watch that first. Okay, but this is Part 2. Okay, just moving on. Okay. Right, sorry, just wait for this to... There we go. Okay, so next bit is all about drugs, okay, and your health. Now, what you need to know is that there are 5 different kinds of drugs. First of all, there are legal drugs and there are illegal drugs. Okay, obviously the legal drugs are things like paracetamol, etc., that you're allowed, but illegal drugs, obviously, you're not. And there are different punishments that you can get for using those. Okay, but let's just go to the 5 main groups of different kinds of drugs. Okay, first one are depressants. Now, what is like it says here, it slows down the workings of the brain, and I'm thinking of, for example, alcohol. Okay. Now, that's the reason why alcohol and driving is banned, because obviously it slows down the workings of your brain, so your reaction times would go down. So an example of a depressant is alcohol. Okay, right, and hallucinogens. Right, now they distort what you see and hear. Now that's, for example, things like LSD. So if you've taken, not if you've taken some LSD, because you won't, but if a person has taken LSD, then they will be able to see different things and see things that aren't there. Okay, and that can be very, very dangerous. For example, a person may feel that they can fly and fall off a building, for example, or see things that aren't really there. So they distort what you can see or what you can hear. Okay, right, painkillers. Now, what painkillers do, things like paracetamol, etc., what they do is you stop your nerve impulses so you don't feel any pain. So if you've got a headache, you can take paracetamol and it will stop you feeling the pain of the headache or reduce it. Now, what people tend to think is painkillers can help you feel, to get you better. They don't. They just stop you feeling pain by stopping your nerve impulses, but they don't actually make you better. Okay, they just stop the pain. Performance enhancers, okay, are another group that develop muscles. The most common one is steroids. Okay, so performance enhancers, steroids, okay, which obviously develop the muscle. Stimulants, now they speed up the workings of the brain, okay, and can help with people with depression. Now, stimulants are the legal versions of stimulants, are things, for example, like caffeine and nicotine, okay, but you can also get illegal versions of stimulants, okay, which are things like cocaine. Now, what they do is they speed up the workings of the brain, okay, so depressants slow it down, but stimulants speed it up. Okay, and obviously you can become addicted to a drug, okay, which means it can be very, very difficult to give up, especially, for example, things like heroin, okay, and if you stop taking drugs like that, if you're a heroin user and you stop taking a drug, you can have something called withdrawal symptoms, where you can feel very, very bad-tempered if you try and give that drug up, okay. So 5 groups of drugs: depressants, hallucinogens, painkillers, performance enhancers, and stimulants. Make sure you know what all 5 of those do. Okay, and obviously drugs come in different classifications, A, B, and C. Obviously, C is being the less, well, they're all illegal, okay, but you get less of a punishment for a class C because it might be seen as slightly less dangerous. So there are things like anabolic steroids, Valium, which can calm people down. Class B drugs, okay, so for C, gives you 2 years in prison. For class B, you get 5. For A you get 7, 14 years for supplying. You can get life in supplying for Class A. So amphetamines, cannabis, for example, is a Class B. For Class A, things like heroin, methadone, cocaine, ecstasy, LSD, magic mushrooms, they are all Class A because they're seen as slightly more dangerous than, for example, things like Valium, etc. Okay, now, moving on to cigarettes, okay, everyone knows that you shouldn't be smoking, but you need to know the 4 different things in cigarettes that actually damage your health. Okay, the first one being carbon monoxide. Now, what it does is, as I've explained in part 1, it stops the red blood cells from carrying oxygen. I'm not going to explain that again because it's in part 1 of the video, which you should have already watched. So, carbon monoxide stops red blood cells from carrying oxygen. Okay, and increases the risk of heart disease. Nicotine, everyone knows, is an addictive drug, and also we know it's a stimulant. Okay, now tar, now that irritates and causes cancer. Tar is that really thick black stuff, and if you can look at a smoker's lung, you will see it covered with tar. Okay, now particulates, what they do is they collect in lungs and they start blocking them. Okay, now that's things like just the actual smoke, yeah, that can actually damage the cilia, and that's how you might develop like a smoker's cough, for example. Okay, many diseases are linked to smoking, and these are just a few. So you need to know that smoking can lead to heart disease, emphysema, which means that your lungs can't hold as much oxygen because the air sacs have been damaged, bronchitis, and obviously cancers of the mouth, throat, esophagus, which is the kind of the windpipe, and the lungs. Okay, now what you'll notice is there's the public advertising of smoking has been banned to discourage people or stop encouraging people to take up smoking, and now obviously now in 2007 smoking was banned in public. And like for example, you no longer can smoke in the pub, okay? But now news agents now are allowed to show their cigarettes on display, which is why they're on the cabinets, okay? So you have to ask what you want. Yeah. So alcohol now, okay, now different alcohol drinks have different numbers of units in them. So for example, a large glass of wine would contain 3 units, one double gin and tonic would contain 2, double wood of vodka would contain 2 units, but if it was a single vodka and coke, for example, it would contain 1. One shot of alcohol contains 1 unit. An average pint of beer, like a premium one, for example, things like I think Stella and Kronenberg, something along those lines, contain 3 units. One normal pint of, for example, Foster's or something like that, or Carling, one of the more common drinks, contain 2.3 units. A pint of cider, 6%, would contain 3.4, and a bottle of wine would contain 9 units. Okay, now you need to know what the daily amount for people are. So males are allowed 4 units. Okay, females are allowed 3 units per day, and the weekly amount is males are allowed 21 units of alcohol and 14 units. Anything more than that can really damage someone's health. Okay, so you also need to know what the effects of drinking alcohol actually are. You need to know the short-term effects of drinking alcohol and the long-term effects. So the short-term effects are you do silly things and you find it difficult to speak clearly. Okay, you lose your coordination. Okay, you can easily lose your balance, hence when drunk people fall over. You can have blurred vision and feel sleepy. If you're trying to remember the short-term effects, I'd remember blurred vision as quite an important one. It's quite an easy one to remember. Okay, and lose coordination. I think those are the 2 key ones. You can also have an increased blood flow through the skin, which is why when people have been drinking alcohol, their skin might appear very, very red. Okay, there's obviously a legal limit on the amount of alcohol that drivers are allowed, okay, and pilots, for example, obviously because their reactions go slow and they can potentially cause an accident. Okay, now the long-term effects of alcohol is that you might have damage to the liver and the brain. So if it ever asks you long-term effects of drinking alcohol, it's a 2-mark question, you need to think liver and the brain. Okay, they're long-term. Short-term, long-term. Okay, now on to homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is all about keeping your body on the inside the same. Okay, now that's exactly what homeostasis means. So inside your body, it should be at 37 degrees, guys. You need to remember that. So 37 degrees is your inner core body temperature, and that's the temperature at which your cells work the best. So 37 degrees, and obviously if you get too hot, you can do something about it. If you get too cold, you can do something about it. Okay, so if you get too hot, you sweat. Okay, and more blood goes to the surface of the skin where it can lose more heat. Okay, now if the person is cold, they warm up by shivering. Okay, eating more food and releasing food from respiration, reduce the sweating, and less blood goes to the surface of the skin. So if someone's very cold, their skin might look very, very blue because the blood's gone away from the surface. Okay, now your body also not only just controls temperature, but it can also control the amounts of oxygen, carbon dioxide, etc. Okay, now you also need to know how body temperature can be taken. Now body temperature can be taken from the ear, can be taken from the fingers, and it can be taken from the mouth and the anus. Okay, and there's various techniques that you can use for taking temperature. Okay, you can use clinical thermometers, sensitive strips, which are the strips that might go over the forehead, digital recording probes, thermal imaging, etc. But the most common one is you need to know you can take it from the ear and the mouth. I'd probably remember the most important 2. Okay, now As I've said, your normal body temperature is 37 degrees. Okay, if you get any higher than that, bad things can happen. So 37 degrees is normal. Okay, you get to 38 and 39, you'll start really sweating and you'll have a fever. At 5 degrees higher from 37, at 42 degrees, you die. Okay, that's not a big, massive window. Okay, that's very, very small. If you go down, however, to 35 degrees, you'll start shivering. Okay, 33 degrees, you'll find it very difficult to stay awake. 28 degrees, yeah, which is only 9 degrees lower than normal, you'll stop breathing, and at 25 degrees you'll die. Okay, so that's how close your temperature has to stay to 37 degrees. Okay, dangers of high and low temperature. Okay, it's important to keep your body temperature at 37 degrees. Okay, like I said, otherwise it can damage your enzymes. Now, enzymes are proteins inside the body which allow you to live. They control everything inside your body. Okay, now you need to know what can happen to you if you get too hot. So if you get too hot, you can have a heat stroke. Okay, where sweating isn't enough. Okay, and then your pulse will become rapid. Okay, and very, very weak. That's a heat stroke. Second one is dehydration. Obviously, you've lost a lot of water from sweating. Okay, and because you've lost all this water from sweating, you're going to have dehydration. Okay, and if you don't solve any of these problems, you can die. I think there was a heat wave a few years ago where quite a few people died. In actual fact, in 2003, like 27,000 deaths in Europe. Okay, and 2,000 people died in England just from heat stroke and dehydration. It's quite important that you do control your temperature. You can't get too cold, okay, because like I already showed you, at 25 degrees you die, 28 degrees your breathing stops. Okay, and so if you don't treat those things, you can suffer from hypothermia. Now that's hypothermia. That's where your pulse rate slows down instead of getting rapid, and you might shiver violently. You can also die from this, like you can die from heat stroke or dehydration. Now, when you are too hot, you obviously sweat. You need to know how sweat actually cools you down. Okay, what happens is when you sweat, the water on your skin, okay, begins to evaporate. Now, when the sweat from your skin begins to evaporate, it takes heat away with it. Okay, because obviously the liquid sweat turns from a liquid into a gas. To do that, it needs energy. Okay, now it gets that energy from the skin or from your body. Okay, now as that energy is used to turn water from a liquid into liquid into gas, it takes away heat with it, yeah, when it evaporates. So that's the key thing, that sweating cools you down because when it evaporates, it takes energy from your body. Okay, you can wear an antiperspirant, but all that does is stops the bacteria from living on the sweat. Okay, yeah, and that's why, you know, when people get out the shower and they feel very cold, that's because all the water evaporates. Okay, now on to the inner parts of the body. So your blood sugar has to be controlled. Okay, if you've eaten some carbohydrates, for example, or some sugary drinks, which you shouldn't really be drinking, okay, your blood sugar, that's the sugar traveling around your body through your arteries, tends to get very, very high. Okay, your blood sugar has to be controlled just like your temperature. And what happens is hormones, okay, which are special chemicals that travel in the blood, okay, can control it. Now, the hormone that controls blood sugar is called insulin, and that's made in a special gland called the pancreas. Okay, hormones travel in the blood where they have an effect. Okay, now, the thing you have to know about hormones is that they're chemicals that travel in the blood, and they're very slow to react, whereas nerve impulses go at lightning speed, very, very fast. Okay, so if it talks about the difference between the speed of hormones and the speed of neurons, hormones travel in the blood are slower, whereas neurons or nerve impulses travel very quickly. Okay, now this is the pancreas that produces the that produces the insulin that can help control your blood sugar. Okay, so normal people have a pancreas that produces insulin that controls blood sugar, but people with diabetes, they don't. Now, what you need to know is that there are two different kinds of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes, where the body can't make any insulin, okay, and that affects 15% of the population, okay, and what they have to do is they have to inject the insulin because their body doesn't make it, and that insulin helps control it. So what they'll do is they'll prick their finger on like a blood glucose monitor that will tell them the amount of glucose is in their bloodstream, and then if that glucose is too high, they'll take some insulin in. Okay, they'll inject some insulin. If their blood sugar is very, very high, they'll inject more insulin. If their blood sugar is slightly higher, then they'll inject less insulin. There was an exam question last year talking about the amounts of insulin and relating to the amount of blood sugar in there. Type 2 diabetes is slightly different. Now, type 2 diabetes is where your body doesn't produce enough insulin, or your cells in your body don't react to it anymore. Now, type 2 diabetes is linked to how overweight you are. So obese people and older people, okay, tend to develop type 2 diabetes. Okay, and the only thing that you have to do is you have to control the amount of carbohydrates and sugars you have in your diet. Okay, because your body can't control it very much anymore. Okay, so two types of diabetes: type 1, where you're born with it; type 2 is where you develop it from being overweight. Okay. Now, talking about hormones inside the body, okay, we need to talk about plants. Now, plants don't have insulin or any of these other hormones, but they do have their own hormones that control their blood sugar. Not the blood sugar, that they control their growth and the direction in which they grow in. Sorry. So auxin can help a plant grow towards light or grow away from light. Okay, or it can help their roots grow towards gravity or away from gravity. Now, you need to think of the plant in two halves. Okay, you need to think of it in terms of the shoots and the roots. You can see this in these experiments. This is cress seed. Okay, now they've cut a hole in the box and light shining in. What's going to happen is that the plants are going to shine towards, grow towards the light. Okay, now this is a disc, and what happens is the disc starts spinning in a circular motion. Okay, so they will get light from all directions, and what will happen is the plants stay grown upright. So if there's light coming from one side, so they may show you like an experiment to prove that plants grow towards a light. Okay, now these two things are called phototrophism and geotrophism. So when the plants shoots, what they do is, imagine the plant in two halves. Okay, you need to think of the plant in two parts: the shoots, which is the upper part of the plant, and the roots, which is the lower part of the plant. Now, the shoots, okay, now what we say is that they have positive phototrophism, which means that the plant's shoots grow towards the light. Okay, now, because the shoots grow towards the light, we call that positive phototrophism. Right, now, the roots, they do not grow towards the light, do they? Okay, they grow away from the light. Imagine if roots started growing towards the light, the plant wouldn't stay inside the soil. So they are negative phototrophic. Okay, so they have negative phototrophism. Now, geotropism is where a plant responds to gravity. So obviously the shoots grow away from gravity, don't they? Okay, they grow towards the light. Okay, so they have negative geotrophism. Whereas the roots, they grow towards the pull of gravity. Okay, they grow towards gravity, which is into the soil. So roots have positive geotrophism. Yeah, so roots, so let's just say it this way. Okay, so shoots are positively phototrophic because they grow towards the light, but negatively geotrophic because they grow away from gravity. Now, roots are negatively phototrophic because they grow away from sunlight, okay, but are positively geotrophic because they grow towards gravity. Okay, they're the essentials. Now, we can manipulate the hormones. That means we can use plant hormones for our own use. For example, farmers, okay, they will develop a kind of an auxin, okay, called synthetic auxin. That is synthetic means it's man-made, and you can spray it on crops. Now, what the hormone will do is, if it's a broad-leafed plant, okay, it will absorb as much of that auxin as possible, and they'll grow too quickly and they will die. It only affects broad-leaved weeds, okay, so which is why it's called selective weed killer, because it only selectively kills the broad-leaved ones instead of killing the crops that you're interested in growing. Okay, so job number one for synthetic auxin is selective weed killers, which killed broad-leaved weeds. Okay, number two, rooting, growing roots, so rooting powder. So if you take a cutting of a plant, so for example, if you've got a nice rose and you want to keep it, you can cut a bit of the rose off and you can plant it in some soil, but if you put some rooting powder in it, which contains synthetic auxin, it will help that plant grow roots, which is very, very useful. So that's the second use of synthetic auxin. So the first one was selective weed killers. Second one is rooting powder and growing roots. Okay, now germinating seeds. Now, some seeds only germinate, which means that they turn from seeds into the actual plants at certain parts of the year. That's what germination is. Okay, now what growers can do is they can force them to grow out of season. So if there's a plant that only germinates in the summer and we want it to germinate in the winter, we just have to give it some gibberellic acid and it forces the seeds to germinate. Okay, and then we can grow them on the inside whenever we want. Okay, now so the first ones were synthetic auxin, the second one is gibberellic acid, and the third one is a hormone called ethene. Now what happens is when you need to transport bananas, you don't want to transport them yellow because they'll bruise. You want to transport them when they're green and harder. Okay, but when they go in the supermarket, you don't want to sell them as green because people don't want to buy green bananas. They want to buy them so they can eat them right away. So what farmers do is they pick them out when they're green, transport them so they don't get bruised, and when they want them to start yellowing, they'll spray them with a hormone called ethene. And that will cause the bananas to ripen and turn from green to yellow, and then you can start selling them. Okay? Job done. Okay, so they're the different ways in which you can use hormones. So the first one was selective weed killers, which uses synthetic auxin. There is rooting powder, which uses synthetic auxin that allows the plant to start growing roots when you've taken a cutting. Then you've got gibberellic acid, which allows seeds to germinate out of season. And you've got ethene, which ethene, which allows bananas to ripen out of season. Now, last bit, we're talking about genetics. So obviously this is a cell. Okay, this is the nucleus, and this contains its DNA. Okay, now if you look at the DNA close up, you will see all of these things. Now these things are called chromosomes. Now in a full body cell, you'll have 46 chromosomes. So 23 would come from the mother and 23 would come from the father, and we can put them into groups over here. Can you see they've come in pairs? So one of these chromosomes would be from the mother and one of them would be from the father. Okay, and obviously you've got your sex chromosomes here. So XX means female. If it was an XY, it would be a male. Okay, now you need to know that there are some features which are controlled by your genetics and some features which are controlled by your environment. Now if you look at this ugly looking kid, you will see that there are some features that have been caused by his genetics and some features which are caused by his genetics. Okay, so let's look at his red hair. Is that caused by the environment? So if he went to live in Spain, for example, would he start being blonde? No, he wouldn't, because it was responsible for his genetics. Straight hair, he was born with straight hair because his genetics says so. And so it's not like if he goes somewhere else, his hair will become curly. So, and that doesn't mean if he starts eating his crusts, his hair will grow curly. It's a genetic trait. He was born with straight hair. Blue eyes, can't change the colour of your eyes. It's a genetic trait. Freckles is also a genetic trait. You have a scar here which would have been caused by, I don't know, maybe him falling over off his bike or something. So that was caused by the environment. Decayed tooth because he didn't brush his teeth properly, so that is because of the environment. Large front teeth, that is due to his genetics. Rounded chin, okay, that's caused by his genetics as well. So his genetics say he's going to have a rounded chin. Ear without a lobe, okay, my lobes are detached, and I got that from my parents, so it's a genetic trait. And large straight nose, again caused by his genetics. So there are different things which are caused by environment, and certain things are caused by your genetics. You need to know which ones they are. There are some things, okay, that, for example, are caused by the environment, like for example his scar and his Yorkshire accent, okay, are caused by the environment. So you guys have a Derby accent, so you say pan, okay, and that's caused by the environment. Okay, so for example if you're born in London, you might have a London accent, like me mate. Okay, other characteristics are affected by both the inheritance and the environment. They're things like height. So your genetics might say that you're going to be 16, ready for growth and repair, and you don't eat a good balanced diet, you may not reach your genetic potential. So your height is a combination of your genetics and your environment. Okay, intelligence. You might be born with a certain intelligence, but if you don't do your homework and watch my revision videos, you may not be as intelligent as your genetics can say you will be able to be. Body mass. Your genetics might say that you're a reasonably slim person, but if you go to her rooms like me every 2-3 times a week, I don't really do that, then you might become overweight, okay, and you might have those delicious Burger Kings. Okay, anyway, Human disorders like red-green colour blindness is caused by your genetics. So is sickle cell anemia, which is where your red blood cells don't form perfectly round. Cystic fibrosis is also inherited, so genetics have got nothing to do with that. Okay, and as I said before, your mother's cells have got 46, your father's cells have got 46 chromosomes, but their gametes, which basically means their egg cells or their sperm cells, have half the number of chromosomes. And when they come together, okay, so when the sperm fertilizes the egg cell, the 23 chromosomes come together with another 23 chromosomes together, it makes 46 chromosomes, okay, which is how many you've got in your body cell. So your body cells have got 46 chromosomes, but your sperm cells, if you're a boy, have 23 chromosomes, and your egg cells, if you're a girl, have 23 chromosomes. 23 gives you 46, not 21. Okay. Now, this is basically what I've just explained, yeah? So you get 46 chromosomes arranged in pairs. Now, like I said over here, yeah, 46 chromosomes, yeah? Or 23 pairs of chromosomes, okay? Now, if you actually look at the sex chromosomes, you will notice that with boys, they have an XY chromosome, whereas females have an XX chromosome, okay? Now, basically, you know, in the egg cell, because females always have XX chromosomes, okay, now when a female's 46 chromosomes divide into two, all egg cells will carry an X chromosome each, won't they? Okay, whereas if a boy has an XY chromosome set, which all boys do, by the way, when he makes the two sperm cells, one sperm cell will have an X chromosome in there, and the other sperm will have a Y chromosome in there. So basically, males determine the sex of the baby. So if the sperm cell contains an X, female egg cells always contain the X. So if a sperm cell fertilizes it with an X chromosome, you're going to have a girl. And if a Y chromosome fertilizes the egg cell, then it's going to be XY, which is going to be a boy. Okay, that is how sex is determined. Okay, now you need to know how variation is caused. Now, variation is how every individual is different. Okay, that's what we call variation. So, for example, in one classroom, all the kids will have different variation. Okay, and that's caused by the gametes being mixed up when they form. So, when the different sperm cells get fertilized by different egg cells, the genes will come together for fertilization. Changes in the genes are called mutations. Okay, you can get faulty genes, like I've already explained to you, but you can get inherited disorders as well. Okay, now, if you mated two plants together, a purple-stemmed one and a green-stemmed one, the result might be a purple-stemmed plant. Why is that? Because what we say is because each plant or every human carries two sets of genes. You're going to have one more dominant one, and you're going to have more of a recessive one. Okay, and so obviously the purple-stemmed one is going to be more dominant. Okay, and so if you ever get a question like that, and that is the end of the revision video, guys. Okay, so if you need to, make sure that you watch it again. Okay, but I'll catch you on the flip side.